The other day with the Riventide's update for Arc Raiders, Embark adjusted weapon durability, and this kind of sparked a bit of some controversy on the weapon economy as a whole. But how bad is it really? Like, what does that actually equate out to in the lifespan of each of your weapons, and is it possible that some of these proposed numbers may not have actually been as drastic as intended on paper? Today we're going to take a dive into the more analytical side of Arc Raiders and the balancing update that we've seen adjusted as of last week's monthly content update. Drop your thoughts as we go along, drop a like if you enjoy the video, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date with all things Arc Raiders and even more FPS content. I'd love to have in the community, but for now, let's get into it. So here's the baseline. Here's what the Riventide's update adjusted weapon durability and burn rate wise. From the patch notes, they've said, we've heard a clear frustration that maintaining higher tier weapons is very expensive compared to lower tier ones. We want higher tier weapons to have more longevity compared to lower tier weapons, so we're adjusting durability loss on shot to match. And then gave the following burn rate adjustments, where common weapons, your gray weapons, were a 75% durability increase, so you're losing more per shot. The uncommon green weapons saw a 50% durability increase on that loss per shot. Rare weapons, your blue, were 35% durability increases, while epic weapons were 5% durability decreases, meaning they lasted a little longer, and legendary weapons, your yellow highest tier, is 10% durability loss of a buff there lasting longer. So common weapons like your Stitcher, Kettle, and the likes, they burn a lot faster than things like your Aphelion, Jupiter, Delabra, and all that you'll see that have durability extensions essentially. And just for good measure, they did mention that weapons that were acquired from knocked out raiders would drop their burn rates by 15%, meaning they're better intact after combat, in favor of attempting to buff a bit of the PvP play here with this and the economy surrounding that. So for many, this was a rather large overcorrection for their concerns. Many people thought that the burn rate and repair rates for higher tier weapons were something that could have just been reevaluated, but in that same vein, it would have been considered that you'd only have to adjust those ones in particular, not any of the other weapons leading up until the epic and legendary categories, and that the adjustments to common, uncommon, and rare weapons were not necessarily warranted, and that those specific weapons now are just kind of burn city depending on which weapon you're taking. And while it's certainly noticeable, how long does it actually take to degrade those weapons now? Like, how much of those changes are enacted in game, and what do they mean in a practical sense? That's where we can turn to Redditor Meme Cut. The following is based off of his findings here with this, some fast-acting testing of every single weapon and seeing how long it takes to degrade one entirely. Now, their findings were from tier 4, so your highest durability here, to showcase from the max durability down to 0. Now, yes, this is something that kind of skews a little bit from tiers 1 to 3, but the durability per shot that is given as well is something that can be used to quickly swap in for a quick calculation of like a tier 1, 2, or 3 as opposed to the 4. Now, according to Meme Cut, each of the weapons go as follows. The Hairpin takes 391 shots or 3.91 stacks of light ammo. The Stitcher takes 1,024 shots or 10.24 stacks of ammo. The Kettle takes 898 shots, which is 9 stacks of light ammo. The Rattler is 739 shots, which is 9.24 stacks of medium ammo, and the Pharaoh is 185 shots, which is 3.1 stacks of heavy ammo. Now, your common weapons, your Anvil, will take 215 shots to completely degrade, so a little over 3.5 mags of heavy now that it's been adjusted. The Berletta takes 937 shots to break, or just over 9 stacks of ammo. The Il Toro, 194, just under 10 stacks, and the Arpeggio is 1,041 shots with that burst accounted. Of course, in most of these situations, you'll see the more rounds it has to expend, the less the degradation per shot happens, and the more it usually takes a bit. So about 13 stacks of ammo to get down to 0. Now, the Canto, getting into your rarer weapons here, this takes 968 shots or 12 stacks of ammo. The Renegade takes 251 shots or just over 3 stacks of ammo. The Osprey takes 279 shots to break. The Venator, 1,041, and the Torrente, 1,285. Again, because you are expending so many rounds in a short period of time, you'll start to see that it requires a little bit more in those faster firing weapons. Getting into your epics, the Bettina takes 874 to break. The Bobcat, 2,185, the Tempest, 1,366, the Hullcracker, 308, and the Volcano, 257. And finally, your legendary weapons of the Equalizer is around 3,450, but again, just because these run on ammo mags, it's a little bit tougher to pinpoint exactly. The Jupiter, about 167, the Aphelion, about 1,130, and the Delabra, 281. So first impressions, how are we feeling about this? Like, we can talk all about the durability increases or decreases by their percentages, but to actually see the burn rates themselves via a more tangible and visible metric is something that I personally find more easy to digest, and I'm sure a lot of other people are like that as well. One, you're like, well, you're almost doubling the burn rate, you're almost adding a quarter of the burn rate to an existing burn rate, and it becomes a jumbled mess of fractions, percentage yields, and stuff like that. But another just ends up being a clean break on how many shots and what you can see in your inventory, a proper visualization. I think that with this visualization, it maybe reels back some of the concern on some, while perhaps validates some concerns elsewhere. Like, personally speaking, I think that things like the Anvil being the most, I would say, versatile weapon that you can take in PvE and PvP engagements. You can take out most of the immediate arc threats, pops, fireballs, ticks, wasps, hornets, all that kind of stuff. Well, also, if you're still into PvP, if you're accurate, you can still do some damage with that and take a raider out pretty quickly. When you see a gun like that, it only lasts 3.5 stacks of ammo now before it needs to be repaired. That's a pretty quick burn rate. While other guns like, let's say, the Stitcher, for a gun that takes next to nothing to craft and repair, over 10 stacks of ammo used to fully burn through that weapon is actually way more than I anticipated, and unless you're purely in PvP lobbies, you likely won't burn anywhere near that amount of rounds. And if you do, and you make it out alive that you have to think about repairing that weapon rather than losing it, well, it's not nearly as bad to repair as what you've likely picked up off of dead enemies. So I think it's fascinating to see these now put into an actual metric that you can judge by actual inventory space. But I guess the question is how accurate are these numbers? Because what's interesting is that some of these feel pretty severe, right? But what if they're not actually entirely accurate? We've already seen an established partial history of unintended changes to items in-game, with probably one of the more notable things we've talked about in the past being the intended blueprint spawn rates and how they drop right before prior expeditions. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, a couple of times now in the expedition sequences, the update to introduce the expedition window has also coincided with higher drop rates for rarer items, like the Hurricane caches is one of the ones that I think of immediately. The Tempest, Bobcat, and Volcano were very, very abundant in those loot pools. They still are pretty easy to find now, with some lessened drop rate that has actually been noted that it wasn't as much whenever the update first initially went out. But that was an unintended adjustment that wasn't where they were supposed to be, right? But at this same point, it also appears that these durability changes may have some unintended numbers contradicting the patch notes that we've seen so far. According to Redditor A Lot Like Dead, he combed through old Reddit threads of burn rates to see what percentages were like before versus after, building upon MemeCut's own tested numbers here to see just how valid they were, and well, they're a bit different. So one thing to note is while the variables of the tier 1 pre-patch testing are something to note versus MemeCut's tier 4, the differences in the burn per shot do check out. Where it's still valid, you're just gonna see maybe the starting numbers a little bit lower versus where we ended up at. But in his math, we see that the intended to actual burn rates pre and post patch are actually pretty different. Just about every single weapon received less harsh adjustments than what was stated in the patch notes, and it even dictates that some weapons like the Osprey received a 45% decrease in durability, which statistically makes it more durable than pre-patch, as odd as that seems. The Jupiter as well had another one that was a standout that was calculated to be 30% of a durability buff as opposed to the intended 10%. So fascinating to see that this may be something that is, while still noticeable in some areas, not as bad as many players, myself included, thought this would have been right off the rip. Potential knee-jerk reaction to just the sheer statistics of the percentage changes, visualizing for a lot of those weapons changes some of that perception. Now, here's the thing I do have to clarify. I still would have liked to see only the durability extensions on higher tier weapons adjusted. I still don't think you really needed to adjust anything in regards to those lower tier weapons at all, but with this in mind, it's an interesting development to what we've seen for this update overall. Now, is it possible that a future update is changing this? I'm sure no doubt Embark has had these numbers logged that was flagged probably internally as like, oh, this isn't what it was supposed to be. Perhaps a weekly update adjusts them, but at the same time, I'd actually be okay if they didn't as well. I think the only one that would make a lot of logical sense to see it targeted is the Osprey. Obviously, if you're putting a nerf across the board to everything in that regard, I don't think as harsh of a nerf is necessary, but when you look at all the other statistics of where it lines up, it's a half mag above the Renegade. But anyways, with that, I want to turn it over to you guys. What do you think? Do you think that it's nice to see that these numbers are a little misaligned? Seeing them quantifiably compared to stacks of ammo, is it something that makes you think, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought it would be? Or perhaps oppositely, do you think it's worse? Let me know. because I truly would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think it's a fascinating topic of discussion that I would hope could amount to some feedback-based changes with the future in the weapon economy here, but do let me know. If you guys enjoyed the video though, you found it at all insightful, do me a favor, drop a like on it. And of course, make sure to subscribe for more Arc Raiders and other FPS content. I'd love to have in the community. For now though, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you topside. Take care and peace.